Jamie and Ava were offered the old Carrington estate at a price too good to be true, they jumped on it. Nestled deep in the woods of East Texas, the mansion stood silent, its stone walls bearing the weight of nearly a century of mystery. The couple were urban explorers turned real estate bloggers, and they couldn't pass up a chance to uncover the secrets of a house abandoned since 1964. Neighbors whispered of people who went in and never came out, but Jamie dismissed it as folklore. Ava, on the other hand, felt something unsettling the moment she stepped into the decaying foyer. A spiral staircase creaked under their steps. Dust-covered furniture stood like forgotten ghosts. A grandfather clock ticked. Odd, considering no one had been here for decades. "How is that thing working?" Jamie asked, half laughing. "No idea. And I don't want to find out," Ava replied, brushing cobwebs from a mirror that didn't reflect her properly. Her image was off. It blinked when she didn't. The couple wandered room by room, documenting everything for their blog, until they stumbled upon something strange. A locked door behind the kitchen that wasn't listed in any of the floor plans. The wood was fresher than the rest of the house, as if it had been added later. "I swear that door wasn't there earlier," Jamie muttered. "Neither was the chill in the air," Ava added, rubbing her arms. They decided to leave it for the next day, but as night fell, the air grew heavier. The shadows didn't just move, they pulsed. Something inside the house wanted them to stay. Or maybe it didn't want them to leave. They went to bed with the fireplace lit, trying to ignore the sound of footsteps that didn't belong to either of them. The night was restless. Ava awoke, gasping for air, drenched in sweat despite the chill that had settled in the bedroom. She had dreamt of the locked door. Only in her dream, it had been wide open, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into blackness with something crawling up it. Jamie, equally disturbed, sat at the edge of the bed. "I think we need to open that door," he whispered, his voice trembling. They returned to the kitchen with a flashlight, their steps echoing loudly in the still house. Jamie tapped along the baseboards, while Ava felt around the floor. A hollow sound beneath the pantry caught their attention. Together, they pried up a warped floorboard. Beneath it lay a rusted iron key, icy cold to the touch. Its surface was etched with strange symbols, nothing either of them recognized. They stood before the door, Jamie sliding the key into the lock. It turned far too easily. With a sharp metallic groan, the door creaked open. Darkness beyond. No stairs, just a corridor lined with old oil paintings, all depicting the same family of four, their eyes scratched out. As they stepped in, the door slammed shut behind them. "Jamie!" Ava screamed, pounding on the wood. It wouldn't budge. Suddenly, lights flickered on. Gas lamps mounted along the walls. Shadows twisted with the flames, curling toward them like smoke. The air smelled of mildew and something older, rot perhaps, or death. The hallway led to another room, this one circular, lined with mirrors. In each reflection, Ava and Jamie appeared, but with their faces slowly melting. Ava backed away and bumped into something. Not Jamie. She turned. A figure stood behind her, its face veiled, hands stretched outward. "Get out!" it rasped. But the door had vanished. Jamie yanked Ava toward the wall, searching for any seam, any escape. The room had changed. No windows, no door, only mirrors that began to fog from the inside, as if something within was breathing. Ava screamed when one mirror cracked, not from impact, but from the inside out. Behind the fracture, a face, bloated, decayed, smiling. "We have to smash them," Jamie shouted, grabbing an old iron rod lying on the ground. He shattered the first mirror. It screamed. Each broken mirror revealed fragments of another realm, hallways made of bone, rooms filled with whispering shadows, children weeping blood. But one mirror held something different. A young girl, perhaps 10, wearing a nightgown stained with ash. "Help me," she mouthed. Ava hesitated. Her instincts told her to ignore it, but her heart screamed otherwise. She reached forward, and her fingers passed through the glass. Instantly, a suction force pulled them in. They found themselves back in the hallway. But it had changed. Older, more decrepit. It wasn't just the past, it was a memory of the house, echoing pain, regret, death. The little girl stood before them, eyes hollow. "They did bad things here," she whispered, "and now the house keeps them." "Who?" Jamie asked. "The ones who stayed." With that, her form flickered and vanished, leaving behind only a stuffed rabbit soaked in blood. Following the trail of red footprints left by the girl, Ava and Jamie wandered through endless halls, each one colder and darker than the last. They stumbled upon a library, books rotting on the shelves, pages fluttering without wind. At its center stood a tree. Yes, a tree. Black, skeletal, its roots dug deep into the floorboards. The roots pulsed as though alive. At its base, carvings, names, hundreds of them. And they were fresh. Jamie found his. No, he stammered, stepping back. Ava's name was there too, etched just below his. Suddenly, a figure stepped from behind the tree. An old man with no eyes, mouth stitched shut, dragging chains across the wooden floor. He pointed to the roots, then to Jamie. Ava screamed as tendrils lashed out, wrapping around Jamie's ankle and dragging him toward the base of the tree. She grabbed his arms, pulling desperately, screaming for help. But the house only echoed her fear back at her. "Don't let it take me," Jamie cried. Ava dug into her pocket, her lighter. She flicked it on, flames licking the air. Without hesitation, she jammed it into one of the roots. The scream that followed wasn't from Jamie. It came from the house itself. The tree caught fire. The fire spread unnaturally fast. It wasn't just wood burning. It was memory, guilt, pain. The very foundation of the house groaned as flames licked up the walls and down into the floor. The eyeless man screamed without a mouth. He disintegrated in the heat, chains clattering to the ground. Jamie stood, coughing, but free. "We have to run," Ava said, helping him toward the hall. But the house fought back. Walls twisted, floors shifted. A staircase led them in circles. Every exit was an illusion. The paintings now cried real tears. Blood leaked from the walls. They found themselves back at the kitchen door. But the locked room wasn't there anymore. Just solid stone. In a final act of desperation, Jamie used the iron rod to smash through the wall. It cracked, then shattered, revealing the morning light. They ran through the hole as the house screamed behind them. They didn't look back. 2 weeks later, their blog went quiet. Friends assumed they were recovering, maybe traumatized. But Ava posted one final entry. It read, "We found the forgotten room. We let it out. We burned the house, but not everything that lived inside. Some of it followed us. We hear whispers at night. Jamie talks in his sleep, in voices that aren't his. We're leaving town, maybe the country. If you ever come across the Carrington estate, keep walking. Even if the house is gone, the land remembers. Some rooms are better left forgotten." It was supposed to be a getaway, a detox weekend. No phones, no work, just whiskey, grilled meat, and stars. When Mason invited his 2 childhood friends, Tyler and Jordan, to his family's old hunting cabin near Devil's Creek, they didn't hesitate. After all, they'd been going there since they were 12. 3 days of fresh air and no city noise, Mason promised, flipping the keys in his hand as they packed the pickup. But something was different this time. Maybe it was how the wind never seemed to stop blowing, or the silence of the forest, almost too silent. Even the sun felt muted behind a pale sky. As they pulled up to the small wooden cabin, weather-beaten but sturdy, Jordan squinted at the surrounding woods. "Didn't there used to be a fence back there?" he asked, pointing past the tree line. Mason frowned. "Maybe Dad took it down before he passed. No one's really been here since." Inside, the cabin smelled of dust, pine, and something sour. The walls were still lined with deer antlers and framed photos of long-forgotten hunting trips. A taxidermied boar stared lifelessly from the mantel. A journal lay on the table, belonging to Mason's father. The last entry was just a few scribbled words. "They never left the creek. They are watching." The guys laughed it off, assuming the old man had just lost it before he died. They lit a fire, cracked open beers, and turned on the radio. Static. Of course. The nearest cell tower was miles away. That night, they sat by the fire pit outside, watching the dark trees sway in the wind. And then they heard it. A woman's laugh, high-pitched and musical, somewhere from the direction of Devil's Creek. Jordan dropped his beer. "Tell me you heard that." They did. Mason refused to admit he was scared, even though Jordan had barely slept. Tyler, ever the skeptic, insisted the laugh had been a coyote or some animal mating call. But curiosity clawed at them. On the second day, after lunch, they decided to hike down to Devil's Creek. The path was overgrown, the old trail markers nearly erased. As they got closer, the air grew heavy, like walking through soup. The trees leaned in, as if listening. Devil's Creek wasn't wide, maybe 10 feet across, but it was black, not muddy, black, like ink. Its surface didn't ripple, not even when Tyler threw a stone in. The splash came, delayed, and then the water closed up as if nothing had touched it. "Is it moving upstream?" Jordan asked. It was. Mason spotted something near the bank. Fabric. A blue scarf tied to a tree limb. Fresh, not old. And nearby, small footprints, barefoot, heading into the water. But none coming out. Suddenly they heard humming. A soft lullaby in a woman's voice from across the creek. "Someone's messing with us," Tyler said. But his voice shook. "No one's supposed to be out here," Mason whispered. Jordan took a step closer to the edge, peering across. "Do you guys see that?" On the far side, between two trees, stood a woman in white. Pale skin, long hair covering her face. Her hands were at her sides, unmoving. Then her head slowly tilted. And she smiled. The three turned and ran without a word. Back at the cabin, the door was open. None of them had left it that way. Night came like a curtain dropping. The stars vanished behind storm clouds, and the firewood wouldn't light. Mason tried to play it cool, but his hands trembled when he poured whiskey. Jordan stared out the cabin window. "She's still there," he said, quietly. Mason looked, but saw only shadows. Tyler sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through his flashlight, though the batteries kept draining within minutes. Then came the knock. 3 taps at the cabin door. No one moved. Another knock. This time slower. Jordan opened his mouth to speak, but someone whispered from the other side of the door. "Let me in, Mason." It wasn't Jordan's voice, or Tyler's. Mason grabbed the shotgun above the fireplace and aimed at the door. The whisper returned, this time directly in his ear, inside the cabin. "You were always my favorite." They turned. The firewood Mason had stacked in the corner was now neatly arranged in the shape of a person. Head, arms, and legs. A small necklace lay on top of it. His mother's. She'd drowned at Devil's Creek 15 years ago. The room suddenly smelled like roses and mildew. The lights flickered and died. And in the dark, someone cried. Mason stayed awake through the night, gripping the shotgun like a lifeline. Tyler muttered in his sleep, caught in fever dreams. Jordan wouldn't speak, only stared at the empty fireplace. At dawn, Mason finally opened his father's journal again. Flipping past the first pages, he found an envelope taped inside, marked in case they return. Inside was a yellowed photograph, a woman by the creek, long black hair, pale skin. Behind her were children, boys, eyes scratched out. The back read, "My mother, my brothers." None survived her. Mason's breath hitched. That was the woman, the same face from the creek. She wasn't just a ghost, she was blood. That day, they made a choice, to burn the cabin and the woods around it, to finish what Mason's father started. They poured gasoline across the foundation, the porch, even inside the fireplace. But when they lit the first match, the fire wouldn't catch. The wind howled from the direction of the creek, and from the trees came dozens of whispers. "You don't leave until I say." The match fizzled in Mason's hand like it had been dipped in water. Tyler tried his lighter. Jordan used a flare. Nothing. The air grew still, unnaturally thick, and the temperature dropped. "She doesn't want to leave," Mason whispered, pacing frantically. "She's attached to this land, this bloodline." Jordan stood rigid near the door. "Look outside." They turned. On every tree, all around the cabin, hung something new. Burlap dolls, hundreds of them. Twisted limbs, black button eyes, and names written across their stitched chests. Jordan, Tyler, Mason. One doll had already fallen, hanging by a string from the porch ceiling. It swayed side to side, twitching. "Nope, I'm done," Tyler muttered. He burst out of the cabin and sprinted toward the truck. Mason shouted after him, but it was too late. They heard the engine sputter. Then silence. Then came the scream. Mason and Jordan rushed after him, but where the truck had been, only the headlights remained, flickering in the fog. No sign of Tyler, just his doll, burned, crumbling in the grass, its face now smiling. Suddenly, a low rumble came from the direction of the creek. The water had risen, overflowing, creeping unnaturally toward the cabin. It wasn't flooding, it was crawling. The woman's voice echoed between the trees. "Mason, come home." He collapsed to his knees. Jordan grabbed him. "We have to finish it. The journal. There's something we missed." Back inside, Jordan flipped the journal open one last time. Tucked in the spine was a final page, folded in half. A ritual. A banishment written in Latin, translated below. "To free the land, the bloodline must bind and burn the echo." The echo, her memory. Mason looked around. His father's hunting jacket still hung near the door. His mother's necklace still draped on the log effigy. And the journal, a record of her evil. "It's not the cabin. It's these," Mason said. "She lives through the memories, through what's left of us." Together, Mason and Jordan gathered everything. Photos, clothes, journals, the dolls with their names. They built a pyre. Then Mason cut his hand and pressed it to the journal. "Bloodline bound," he whispered. This time the fire lit. It roared. A scream burst through the woods, long, sharp, and furious. The wind turned hot. The dolls on the trees burst into flame. The black water receded, and from the fire they saw her, no longer smiling. Her face melted away like wax in the sun, revealing hollow sockets and rotted teeth. She screamed once more and vanished into ash. The fire burned until sunrise. Tyler was never found. Mason and Jordan returned to the city, forever changed. Mason never spoke of Devil's Creek again. But sometimes, in dreams, he still hears her, whispering, watching, waiting. After a difficult breakup and the loss of her job, Emily was eager for a fresh start. She found a charming one-bedroom apartment in a historic building downtown. The rent was surprisingly affordable, and the landlord seemed eager to have her move in. The building had character, ornate moldings, creaky wooden floors, and a vintage elevator with a manual gate. Emily was enchanted. She moved in on a sunny afternoon, her spirits high. That first night, as she unpacked, she noticed a small peephole in her bedroom wall, about the size of a dime. It seemed odd, but she dismissed it as a quirk of the old building. However, as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She chalked it up to nerves and exhaustion. Over the next few days, Emily began to feel increasingly uneasy. She would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye, but when she turned, nothing was there. The peephole in her bedroom wall seemed to emit a faint draft, and she was certain she could hear faint breathing when she pressed her ear to it. One evening, she decided to tape over the peephole. The next morning, the tape was gone. She was certain she hadn't removed it. She confronted the landlord, who dismissed her concerns, insisting that no one had access to her apartment. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Emily began to investigate the building's history. She discovered that a previous tenant in her apartment had disappeared under mysterious circumstances years ago. Emily's research led her to old blueprints of the building, revealing a small, hidden room adjacent to her bedroom. There was no door to this room from her apartment, but it was accessible through a narrow passage from the basement. She ventured into the basement, navigating the labyrinth of storage units and old pipes. Behind a stack of forgotten furniture, she found a narrow passageway leading to the hidden room. Inside, she discovered a small, windowless space with a chair positioned directly behind the peephole. On the floor were remnants of food wrappers and a blanket. Horrified, Emily realized someone had been living there, watching her. She called the police, who searched the room but found no one. They assured her the space was now secure, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Despite the police's assurances, Emily's unease grew. She began receiving anonymous notes slipped under her door, each more disturbing than the last. One read, "I see you." Another simply said, "Don't leave." She installed security cameras, but they were mysteriously disabled. She changed her locks, but the notes continued. The landlord remained unhelpful, insisting she was imagining things. One night, she awoke to find the peephole uncovered again. This time, she saw an eye staring back at her. She screamed, and the eye disappeared. She called the police again, but they found no evidence of an intruder. Emily decided to take matters into her own hands. She set up a trap, placing a motion-activated camera in the hidden room. That night, the camera captured footage of a man entering the room through the basement passage. He sat in the chair, watching her through the peephole. She took the footage to the police, who identified the man as a former tenant who had been evicted years ago, but had never truly left. He had been living in the hidden room, surviving off scraps, and watching the apartment's occupants. The man was arrested, and Emily was offered a new apartment. She moved out immediately, hoping to leave the nightmare behind. Though the man was gone, Emily couldn't escape the trauma. She suffered from nightmares and anxiety, constantly feeling watched. She sought therapy and gradually began to heal. Years later, she read an article about a woman who had moved into her old apartment and reported similar experiences. Emily reached out, sharing her story and warning the new tenant. The building was eventually condemned and demolished, but Emily's experience remained a haunting reminder of the horrors that can hide in plain sight. After a recent breakup, Sarah moved into a quaint apartment in an old building downtown. The rent was affordable, and the location was perfect. The apartment had a vintage charm, with creaky wooden floors and antique fixtures. On her first night, as she was unpacking, she noticed a large, ornate mirror in the hallway. It wasn't hers, and she didn't recall seeing it during the initial viewing. Assuming it was left by the previous tenant, she decided to keep it. That night, she had unsettling dreams. She saw a man standing in the hallway, staring at her through the mirror. She woke up in a cold sweat, dismissing it as a nightmare. A few days later, while cleaning, Sarah noticed that the mirror was slightly ajar. Curious, she pulled it open, revealing a hidden door behind it. The door led to a small, dark room filled with old furniture and personal belongings. Among the items, she found a diary belonging to a man named Thomas, who had lived in the apartment decades ago. The entries detailed his descent into madness, claiming he was being watched through the mirror. Sarah began to feel uneasy, sensing that she was not alone in the apartment. She started hearing whispers and footsteps at night, always coming from the hallway. One evening, Sarah saw the man from her dreams standing in the hallway mirror. He was tall, with hollow eyes and a sinister grin. She turned around, but no one was there. When she looked back at the mirror, it was empty. Terrified, she covered the mirror with a sheet, hoping to block whatever was coming through. That night, she heard scratching sounds behind the mirror, as if someone was trying to get out. She decided to research the building's history and discovered that Thomas had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and several tenants had reported strange occurrences in the apartment over the years. Sarah's mental state began to deteriorate. She started seeing the man in the mirror more frequently, and he began to speak to her, whispering dark thoughts and urging her to do unspeakable things. She isolated herself from friends and family, consumed by the mirror and the man within. Her apartment became a prison, with the mirror as her tormentor. Desperate for help, she reached out to a local paranormal investigator who agreed to visit the apartment. Upon arrival, he immediately sensed a dark presence and advised her to remove the mirror. The investigator and Sarah attempted to remove the mirror, but it wouldn't budge. As they tried, the man in the mirror appeared, more vivid and terrifying than ever. The room grew cold, and objects began to fly around violently. The investigator performed a cleansing ritual, chanting and using sage to banish the entity. The man in the mirror screamed, and the mirror shattered into pieces, releasing a burst of energy that knocked them both to the ground. When they regained consciousness, the apartment was silent. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and the hidden room behind the mirror had vanished. Sarah moved out of the apartment, seeking a fresh start. She remained haunted by the experience, but found solace in helping others who had encountered similar phenomena. The building was eventually condemned and demolished, erasing the physical remnants of the horror. However, whispers of the man in the mirror persisted, with rumors of his presence appearing in mirrors elsewhere. Sarah continued to warn others about the dangers of unseen entities and the thin veil between our world and the unknown. The Thompson family, Mark, Sarah, and their 2 children, Lily and Ben, moved into the old farmhouse in Black Hollow, seeking a fresh start. The house, nestled amidst dense woods, had been abandoned for decades. Its creaky floors and peeling wallpaper hinted at its age, but the Thompsons saw potential. From the moment they arrived, an unsettling feeling hung in the air. The locals had warned them about the house's history, tales of disappearances and strange occurrences, but Mark dismissed them as mere folklore. That night, as they settled in, Lily claimed to see a shadowy figure in the hallway. Sarah brushed it off as imagination, but the unease lingered. Days turned into weeks, and the family's unease grew. At night, they heard whispers echoing through the halls, voices too faint to understand, but unmistakably present. Objects moved on their own, and cold spots appeared in rooms without explanation. Lily became increasingly withdrawn, often speaking to unseen entities. She claimed they were the others who lived in the house. Ben, too young to understand, began having night terrors, screaming about the dark man watching him. Sarah, desperate for answers, delved into the house's history. She discovered that the previous owners had vanished without a trace, their belongings left behind, as if they'd simply disappeared. Sarah, determined to save her family, sought help from a local historian. He revealed that the land was once a site of occult rituals, and the house was built atop a place of great darkness. The rituals had opened a gateway, allowing malevolent entities to cross into the world. The historian warned that the only way to close the gateway was to perform a cleansing ritual, requiring immense strength and sacrifice. Sarah knew it was their only hope. She prepared for the ritual, gathering the necessary items and studying the ancient texts. The house resisted, unleashing terrifying visions and attempting to thwart her efforts. On the night of the ritual, the house erupted in chaos. Walls bled, and the air was thick with malevolence. Sarah stood her ground, chanting the incantations as the shadows closed in. Mark, now fully possessed, attacked her, but she managed to subdue him long enough to complete the ritual. A blinding light filled the house, and the shadows screamed in agony before dissipating. The house fell silent. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by an eerie calm. The family, though scarred, had survived. The Thompsons left Black Hollow, never to return. They sought therapy and tried to rebuild their lives, but the scars remained. Lily and Ben suffered from recurring nightmares, and Mark struggled with guilt over his actions while possessed. Sarah documented their experience, warning others about the dangers lurking in forgotten places. The farmhouse was eventually demolished, but locals claimed to hear whispers where it once stood. The shadows of Black Hollow had been banished, but their memory lingered, a testament to the darkness that can reside in the most unsuspecting places. It was a crisp autumn evening when 5 friends, Jake, Emily, Marcus, Sarah, and Ben, gathered around a campfire in the woods. The conversation turned to local legends, and the most infamous was the old Blackwood Asylum, abandoned for decades after a series of mysterious deaths. Jake, always the thrill-seeker, proposed a dare: spend the night inside the asylum. The others hesitated, but peer pressure and the allure of adventure won them over. They packed flashlights, cameras, and snacks, setting out towards the looming structure as the sun dipped below the horizon. The asylum stood like a sentinel, its windows shattered and ivy crawling up its decaying walls. A rusted gate creaked open, revealing a path overgrown with weeds. As they stepped inside, the air grew colder, and an oppressive silence enveloped them. Inside, the asylum was a labyrinth of peeling paint, broken furniture, and graffiti-covered walls. The group split up to explore, their flashlights casting long shadows that danced with every movement. Emily stumbled upon a patient record room, files strewn across the floor. She picked up a folder labeled Patient 237 and read about a man who claimed to hear voices and see visions. The notes ended abruptly with a scribbled warning: "Do not engage." Meanwhile, Marcus found a locked door with strange symbols etched into it. He called the others, and together they managed to pry it open. revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Curiosity piqued, they decided to venture down. The staircase led to the basement, where the air was thick with mildew and decay. The walls were lined with cells, their doors ajar, revealing rusted beds and restraints. A sense of dread settled over the group as they realized this was where the most disturbed patients were kept. Ben found a journal belonging to a former nurse, detailing experiments conducted on patients without consent. The entries grew increasingly frantic, ending with a final note. They've awakened something. It's watching. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the corridor, and the lights flickered. Panic set in as they realized they were not alone. The group huddled together, their flashlights revealing fleeting glimpses of a shadowy figure lurking just beyond the light's reach. Whispers filled the air, unintelligible but filled with malice. Sarah screamed as she was pulled into one of the cells by an unseen force. The others rushed to her aid, finding her unconscious and with strange symbols carved into her arms. Realizing they had disturbed something ancient and malevolent, they decided to flee. But the asylum seemed to shift, corridors changing, exits disappearing. They were trapped. Desperate, Jake remembered the symbols Marcus had found earlier. They retraced their steps to the door, now sealed shut. Emily, using the notes from the patient file and the nurse's journal, deciphered a ritual to banish the entity. They performed the ritual, chanting the incantation as the asylum trembled. The entity screamed, a sound that pierced their very souls before dissipating into a cloud of smoke. The door creaked open, revealing the path to freedom. They emerged into the night, the asylum silent once more. The friends never spoke of that night again, each haunted by nightmares and visions. Sarah bore the scars of the symbols, a constant reminder of their ordeal. Years later, the asylum was demolished, but rumors persisted of strange occurrences on the site. The entity, though banished, seemed to linger, waiting for the next group of curious souls to awaken it once more. On a cold, gloomy night, 5 friends, Jack, Emily, Sarah, Ben, and Lisa, dared each other to spend the night in the infamous Blackwood Asylum. The structure stood ominously against the moonlit sky, its empty windows like dark, hollow eyes. As they pushed open the heavy, creaking doors, the friends were greeted by a chilling gust of wind. The interior was as eerie as the exterior, filled with remnants of a time long gone. Story.com. Among the friends was Jack, a brave yet skeptical young man. He led the group, flashlight in hand, illuminating the way through the derelict corridors. The eerie silence was suddenly broken by a distant, chilling wail. The friends exchanged nervous glances. The ghost stories about the asylum seemed to be more than just urban legends. As they wandered deeper into the asylum, they came across a room filled with old patient records. The papers were yellowed with age, the ink faded, but the stories they told were horrifying. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and an eerie figure materialized before them. The group cautiously descended the narrow staircase, their flashlights casting elongated shadows on the damp, crumbling walls. The air grew colder with each step, and an oppressive silence enveloped them, broken only by the creaking of the old steps beneath their feet. At the bottom, they found themselves in a long corridor, lined with rusted doors. Faded numbers were barely visible on the peeling paint. The atmosphere was thick with mildew and decay, and the faint scent of something foul lingered in the air. They opened one of the doors, revealing a small room with a rusted bed frame and tattered restraints. On the wall, scratched into the plaster, were the words, "They watch, they wait." The message sent a shiver down their spines. As they explored further, strange occurrences began. Emily felt a cold hand brush against her shoulder. but when she turned, no one was there. Ben heard whispers echoing through the halls, unintelligible but filled with malice. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from behind them. They turned to see the door they had entered through slam shut. Panic set in as they realized they were not alone. Trapped in the basement, the group searched for another exit. They stumbled upon a room filled with old patient records and photographs. Among them was a file labeled Patient 237, detailing a man who claimed to hear voices and see visions. The notes ended abruptly with a scribbled warning: "Do not engage." As they read, the temperature dropped further, and a shadowy figure appeared at the end of the corridor. It stood motionless, watching them. The group froze, fear gripping them. The figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind a chilling silence. They realized that the asylum was not abandoned. It was inhabited by something malevolent. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. The group knew they had to escape before it was too late. Desperate to find a way out, the group retraced their steps, only to find the layout of the asylum had changed. Hallways led to dead ends, and doors that once opened were now sealed shut. The building seemed to be alive, manipulating their path. Emily remembered the symbols they had seen earlier and suggested they might be part of a ritual to banish the entity. They gathered the necessary items from the records room and prepared to perform the ritual. As they began, the shadows closed in, and the whispers turned to screams. The ground shook, and the walls bled. The group chanted the incantation, their voices trembling. A blinding light filled the room, and the entity let out a deafening roar before dissipating into nothingness. The asylum fell silent. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by an eerie calm. The group found the exit door ajar, leading them back into the night. The friends never spoke of that night again, each haunted by nightmares and visions. Sarah bore the scars of the symbols, a constant reminder of their ordeal. Years later, the asylum was demolished, but rumors persisted of strange occurrences on the site. The entity, though banished, seemed to linger, waiting for the next group of curious souls to awaken it once more.